Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this afternoon's webinar, Nature as Canvas, Ephemeral Art and Outdoor Learning. I am pleased to welcome those who are here to watch the webinar live, and also for those of you who are watching asynchronously, thanks for checking us out on the Maine DOE YouTube site. I am Joshua Chard. I am the Maine Department of Education Arts Integration Teacher Leadership Fellow. I'm also the 2024 Maine Teacher of the Year, and I'm a second grade teacher at the East End Community School in Portland. And I'm really excited to be joined by a very special guest today on our last webinar of the 2024-2025 school year. Um, Becky Hallowell, the 2025 Maine Teacher of the Year. My friend Becky is a fourth grade teacher at Wiscasset Elementary School, and there is no one that I would go to before Becky to talk about outdoor learning and getting students outside and how to use the outdoors as our classroom. Becky, you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. Hello, everybody. My name's Becky Hallowell. I am the 2025 Maine Teacher of the Year, and I teach fourth grade at Wiscasset Elementary School, which is blessed to be on the bank of the Sheepscot River. And we do a lot of outdoor learning in a classroom space that we have right on the riverbank. So we take every opportunity possible to get outside.
So this year I've been doing every month I've been introducing topics on how classroom teachers can integrate art into their classroom and in fact you don't have to be an artist to integrate the arts into your classroom. And when I was thinking about what is the best way to end the year and I was thinking about how squirrely my second graders are and what can we do to engage our students at the tail end of the school year, and I thought let's talk a little bit about how outdoor learning can inform artistic expression in our students. So let's go over the learning targets for our session because, of course, we always have to have our learning targets visible and transparent. And so today, our learning targets are, after this session, I will be able to identify ways to use natural materials in outdoor spaces to support student creativity and cross-curricular learning. After this session, I will be able to plan and facilitate a nature-based art experience that integrates academic content such as science, math, literacy, or SEL. And I will be able to explain how ephemeral art practices foster student voice, connection to place, and engagement with the learning process. But before we jump into all of the kinds of projects and all of the work that you can engage in with your students, I wanted to give Becky a chance to talk a little bit about why outdoor education? Why do we want to get our kids outside? Why is it important that we engage with the place where we find our schools?
Did you want me to start now, Joshua?
Absolutely.
Wonderful. So I have been passionate about taking students outside since I started teaching in 1994. In 1994, I would take the kids out to pick dandelions. I would take them out to run around, but I didn't understand why it was such a positive experience for everyone. And I started researching the why in the last 10 years. And what the reading that I've been doing tells me is that our kids can actually focus better once they return to the classroom when they've been outside. Taking students outside who have attention deficit hyperactivity disorder are actually given an effect that simulates medication when they are outside in nature. And in the last 20 years, our students are far more likely to be breaking bones because they aren't moving their bodies in a way that has their muscles built to support their bone structure. And so I would rather have my kids outside climbing trees and going underneath puddle or going through puddles and around rocks because it's building their muscles and they're far more engaged. I really believe that when children are engaged in nature, they learn to care about it, and they are more willing to work to protect what they fall in love with. So when my students are excited about ants and flowers and pollinators, they're more likely to want to engage in practices that will protect nature as they grow into adults. So I'm always looking at the long game. I want to make sure that the work I do with students is helping to create a generation of caretakers for our planet. And being outside allows the students who struggle academically and struggle with sitting at a desk to show what they know through their observations and their movement. Is that succinct enough?
Absolutely. Thanks
Okay,
for that.
sure.
Yeah, and I would add that when we take students outside, it gives them a sense of their place in the universe, right? And Becky, you teach in a more rural school system, but I
Mhm.
teach in an urban school system where students often are not able to get outside. Maybe their neighborhoods aren't safe for them to play outside and explore outside, or parents have other reasons for not having their children engage with the outdoors. And so for me, another reason that's really important for getting students outside is that they're not afraid of being outside. I find a lot of my students are afraid of insects. They're afraid of the unknown in the great outdoors. And removing that mystery and giving them a sense of their place in the universe is really important. I'm going to invite anyone who's on the Zoom who would like to unmute to answer the question, what comes to mind for you when you think about outdoor education? If anyone would like to unmute and chime in, please feel free to do so. All right, given that no one is unmuting, which is not unusual on a webinar like this, we're going to go on. So, why nature-based art? Like, isn't it good enough? We have art once a week. We'll go to the art room once a week. Isn't that enough engagement with art with students? I would argue that it's absolutely not. And when we engage with nature and we create art in nature, it encourages observation and sensory awareness. It deepens students' connection with place. And as Becky was talking about earlier, it supports creativity and emotional regulation. Becky, what do you think shifts when students create outdoors?
So we were just talking about this morning when we had a nature journaling session. And so the difference outdoors, when I say to them, I want you to be still and give them 10 minutes to sit, they become more highly aware of what's going on around them. So instead of that video game mentality where everything is shifting in 1 second bases, these kids are actually following an ant carrying an inchworm for 5 minutes. And their ability to start focusing improves. And as Joshua was saying earlier, the kids who come in with me who are afraid of insects, they are watching them far more curiously. And as they learn more about these insects, they're less afraid of the insects. And they see owls, which owls is our outdoor wonderful learning space. They see owls as a place where they are safe and they're willing to take chances.
Great. So I'm going to say as we begin, I'm the Arts Integration Fellow. Being a fellow means that it is my job to be a learner and share what I have learned as part of my process of preparing each month to present on a different topic. I see that my friend Melissa is on the call. Melissa is an extraordinarily skilled art educator. I am not an art educator. I am, in fact, a classroom teacher who believes that the arts are core curriculum and an important part of the curriculum. Melissa, I would definitely invite you to chime in as we're going along and throw your expertise out there along with anyone else. Let's keep it informal. And if you want to unmute and show something, throw something out into the conversation, absolutely, please feel free to do so. Today, we're going to mostly be focusing on ephemeral art, which is temporary art made from natural materials, and it's actually intended to change, decay, or disappear. And so, Becky, do you want to talk a little bit about you discovered the artist Andy Goldsworthy?
Sure.
You want to talk a little bit about what you learned and the work that you've done with that?
Sure. So I was I was fortunate to attend a teacher's institute at the ecology school, and if you've never done that, I highly suggest you look into the ecology school. In that space, in that time, I was working with several different teachers, and one was an art teacher, and she introduced me to Andy Goldsworthy, who has just gone around the world and created art that will disappear. It may be leaves, it may be sticks. He's built stone walls in a curvy fashion. And the most amazing thing is he spends hours on this artwork only to have it disappear. And so I show an Andy Goldsworthy slideshow to my students, and we talk about what they're noticing and seeing. And then they try to use Andy Goldsworthy style, not exactly replicate exactly what he's done, but take that notion of using natural colors and natural objects to create sculptures and artwork.
Becky,
And
can I stop you for a second?
sure.
Is your slideshow coming up on my visual?
Yes.
Okay,
Yep.
perfect. Thank you.
Yep. So if you look at the slide on the left, that's an Andy Goldsworthy artwork. And the kids were really excited about this one because I'm a bit of a geek about mushrooms. And they were thrilled that this artwork had mushrooms in it. But then they wanted to try color blending with the different colored leaves, rocks, and berries. This Andy Goldsworthy work is very fun to do in the fall because we have such shocking colors with the leaves. And they go on a hunt. They fill bags with natural materials, and then they go down to owls and they create with the materials they found. And the neat thing about it is they start negotiating with each other. Like somebody, if you look at the picture that Joshua is showing right now, right under the green leaf, there's this brown rectangular pod-like thing, and that's a black locust tree seed pod, which rattles when you shake it. So a lot of the kids, even though it's not super colorful, they liked the texture and the shape of it, and they incorporated that into their art. So, as I said, fall is a great time to try to do Andy Goldsworthy inspired art with your students. Oh,
Great.
Joshua, can you go to the slide that has the sticks in the water? Yes. So one of the really amazing things was the kids didn't contain themselves to doing flat artwork that was on the ground. What you see in the picture to the right is the students using sticks between two trees and leveraging the sticks and trying to weave with them and then put leaves into where they've been weaving with the sticks. And it was a remarkable structure when they were done with it.
Great. And later on, I will share a link to Andy Goldsworthy's website and where people can access his body of work. Um, does anyone have any questions or anything they'd like to say about the images that we just shared of Becky's students' work? All right. So when we talk about ephemeral art, it's process over product. I know Melissa's going to really like that because I know Melissa is a process-based art teacher. Obviously, we love to celebrate the product at the end, but that process is really important. And so ephemeral art is a temporary process-focused creation using natural materials. This is a practice in presence, which Becky alluded to a little bit when she said, "Can we have 10 minutes of stillness?" What does 10 minutes of stillness in the outdoors feel like? And I agree with you, Becky. I think that students have an easier time finding stillness in the outdoors than they do inside the classroom. And which goes counter to what you might expect because it seems like there'd be more distractions outside. But there's something about being out in nature, being outdoors that has a calming effect on our bodies. It's a practice in flexibility, and it's a practice. Ephemeral art is honors change. What do you think? A lot of times when we think about creating art with students, we're thinking about creating something that is lasting, that goes home, might be displayed on the refrigerator, or parents might frame a piece that's done in art class and hang it on the wall, or display something that was created in a ceramics class. Becky, what do you think students learn from creating something that doesn't last?
Well, I feel like the students in creating this artwork that isn't going to last allows them some flexibility and freedom of thinking. And it helps with the idea of revision. So you can create something knowing that it easily, these are natural materials. You can move them, you can add to them, you can take them away. And it's not like you have this piece of paper or clay that you're wrecking. So the kids understand that they can constantly change and it's not going to last. So there's not this pressure of making something that's perfect. And we have a philosophy that we leave nature in nature and having the kids understand that they can let go and walk away from something that they've worked on gives them a little bit more freedom. And it also helps them understand that you don't have to become a hoarder of all things art. And I think parents appreciate that they haven't brought home every stick, leaf, mushroom, and rock that they found because of the leave nature in nature philosophy.
Yeah, and I think that for me, I also think that it does. It's sort of it creates this flexibility because the materials are really easy to manipulate and move around. And when a student has reached final draft, you certainly can capture those pieces by photographing it, but knowing that the actual piece is going to disappear, is going to go back into the natural cycle. And when we're doing nature-based learning, we want kids to understand that there are cycles in nature, and um, that piece is going to the materials that they use for that piece are going to return right back into that natural cycle. They're either going to decay or they're going to be available for another student to come and create with at a different time. And so I think that that's really interesting and exciting. I love the idea of students being able to use technology. I have one-to-one iPads in my classroom to record that work. And photography becomes another art form that you can practice in nature. It's not ephemeral, obviously, but it becomes another art form you can practice while you're outside, experiencing your environment and learning from your environment. So, cross-curricular connections. Um, I specifically put down in bullet points for ELA, science, math, SEL. Becky was talking a little bit about her nature journals. We know that there's a lot of research that shows that when you allow students the opportunity to sketch, that it has a cognitive impact and it has an impact on their learning and their ability to retain what they have learned. Becky and anyone else who's on the call, please chime in also. What are some ways that we can have some cross-curricular connections that maybe some ways that are obvious? I know some of the things you're going to talk about because I follow you on social media, which will let people know how they can follow you as well.
Sure.
Um, but what are some ways, obvious and less obvious, that you can use nature-based art in the content areas in the classroom?
Well, I'll just start by reiterating how important nature journals are, particularly for my students who don't enjoy writing. I have, excuse me, one student who was loath to put any words on paper, but when he is allowed a space in our learning space by the river, he will find that Canada goose and he will sit for a long amount of time just observing it and sketching what he sees. And that is honored just as much as writing because he's recording his thoughts. When it comes to science, one of my favorite things I did last week was take advantage of the lilies of the valley that were growing in my garden. So I did not leave nature in nature, but I allowed that it was for educational purposes. So I brought in a lily of the valley for all of the students, and they have science journals in the classroom. I had them first sketch the lilies of the valley and think about the shapes they had, and then we reviewed quantitative and qualitative data. So what can you count? And they first started by counting the number of flowers on the plant, and then they were comparing, are the number of flowers always the same? And they weren't for us. And then they started measuring using centimeters and millimeters, and they had to decide what the right unit of measure was for a different part of the flower. So they were making scientific decisions based on their needs. And then we started talking about qualitative data, and that's what do you feel, what can you smell? And they were coming up with fantastic similes trying to describe the scent of a lily of the valley and really looking at what the colors were and trying to describe the reddish that they saw at the base of the plant. And is it red? Is it maroon? So just taking that natural object and observing it was a great practice in science. And then when we talk about math, my favorite thing to do outside with my students is grab a stick because the options are limitless. They can use adjectives to describe that stick. But for math, I like to talk about supplementary angles. And the kids bring protractors down. They have to find the acute angle if the stick has a twig coming off of it, and then find the obtuse angle and learn how to use that protractor to determine the angles and understanding that the top number and the bottom number add up to 180 degrees. So that's a fun way to do math. And it's not necessarily art, but I can just put a clothesline out and I'll have the kids take turns putting the things in numerical order. So it may be decimals, it may be fractions or multiples. And they take turns pinning something on a line. And just that action of pinning something on a line is far more engaging for them than trying to do a worksheet. When it comes to SEL, one of my favorite activities that we did throughout the years work with our pre-K friends. And the pre-K kids were talking about feelings that whole for a week. And then the fourth graders met up with the pre-K kids. We went down to Owls together, and their job was to find natural materials to create a face displaying an emotion. And my fourth graders were wonderful coaches for the pre-K kids in finding the materials and then deciding how do you show happy? How do you show scared or angry using sticks? And it was just wonderful to watch the collaboration and then the thought that went behind how, making an emotion be seen in natural objects.
I would add to the SEL. I love the idea of using natural materials to create self-portraits and starting by studying artists' self-portraits because most artists do not represent themselves in a realistic way. If you look at a Picasso's self-portraits, if you look at different movements in art and what self-portraits look like, I think the kids get stressed out when we ask them to draw pictures of themselves because they have a very difficult time without explicit instruction provided by an artist, which I am not. Without that explicit instruction, it's hard to know how to draw a face. It's hard to know how to draw yourself. But when you're given the freedom to represent yourself using natural materials and then explain why you chose the materials you chose and why you used them the way you used them, it's a way of sharing a piece of yourself, which is what artists do. We share pieces of ourselves when we create art. As a theater artist, what happens up on that stage is a piece of me. Anyone that has gone to see multiple shows directed by me are like, oh, that's what Joshua does, and that's Joshua on stage. I think it's the same thing. It takes the pressure off. I do a project that I love. We have this amazing tree that our school was literally built around. The architects designed it to save this tree. And it's outside of our cafeteria. Our cafeteria, for those of you who don't know, East End Community School sits on Munjoy Hill in Portland. We have panoramic water views from our school. And so our cafeteria has floor to ceiling windows overlooking Back Cove in Portland. This beautiful tree, I love to take the time. We sit in a circle around the tree, so we all have different angles on the tree. And then we spend hours drawing the tree and moving beyond the idea of when you draw a tree, you draw a lollipop tree, but instead you start to really study the details and the textures in the tree and work toward drawing really realistic drawings of small sections of that tree. And then comparing your drawings because it's also about perspective, right? If you're sitting on a different side of the tree, you're looking at something different and drawing something different. And they build this relationship with this tree that is so deep, and they grow to love this tree so much because we're not just walking by it and saying, "Oh, look, there's a maple tree." We're actually becoming intimate, building an intimate relationship with that tree. And something that I love to do. That also, it's a science activity. It can be an ELA activity as they write about what they discover about their tree. But again, it's social emotional learning because, as you mentioned earlier, Becky, being in the outdoors and really interacting with nature does help us regulate our emotions. And so that's something that I love to do as an artistic activity outdoors. And again, we're in the city, so there's cars driving by and fire trucks and police cars. None of it matters because they're so focused in on that tree, on their tree. I think that obviously there's all sorts of ways to read about nature and write about nature, to read in nature. I don't know about you, but it feels different to me when I sit on the rocks by the ocean reading a book than it feels reading a book on my couch. And so these are all ways that overlap with what we're doing in our classrooms already. Is there anyone who's here who would like to unmute and say anything that they already are seeing some overlap with what they're already doing in their classrooms that they could try as part of their practice moving forward? Anyone want to unmute? And
Joshua, I'd love to follow up on what you're saying about the trees and SEL. So our school is blessed to partner with Midcoast Conservancy, and the kids go to Hidden Valley Nature Center every month. And the first month they go, they adopt a tree, and that becomes their tree. So instead of just having one, they're really fortunate that they have to walk around and they pick the tree that feels right. But when we talk about watching change, they
Mhm.
spend a time every month with their nature journal recording the change, and not just the change in the tree, but what's happening underneath the tree, what's happening over the tree. After a big storm, we had one kid lose a great big limb off of their tree. And my favorite was the kiddo that picked the dead tree that was on the ground and was becoming an earth log and fostering so much growth. And then today, when I was chatting with the kids about their experiences with sitting in nature and being still, I said, I need to help other teachers understand why this is important. So you need to help me give the words. And the constant and recurring theme was that nature can be the bright spot of their day, even when their day is hard. They're like, you could have a bad start to the morning, but you just look at that one bug, or you look up at the sky and it's a day brightener. And I I couldn't have said it better. So our grumpy Gus's that come in the morning because something happened are able to leave it when they step into our outdoor classroom or into our garden.
Becky, that also makes me think that as you're drawing and sketching and observing change in your tree, as you're going through the school year, you're also changing as a learner
Mhm.
and as a citizen and as a person. And what are those parallels we can draw between the changes that we see as we're observing nature and the changes that we're feeling in ourselves as we grow as learners and as people, which also is another really significant social emotional component is being able to reflect on change over time and growth over time. And so that's what immediately popped into my head when you were talking about observing change. So I think that that's an exciting direction that you could go in with that. Becky, you just
Yep.
included some examples here. Do you want to talk a little bit about what your
Yeah.
examples here?
I would love to talk about these examples. On the left, you can see the lily of the valley observation that a kiddo was doing, and we have science journals in the classroom, and then down in Owls, I have a giant storage space, and so there we keep our nature journals, and so they have two journals that they're maintaining. The one you're noticing is our indoor science journal where they're collecting quantitative and qualitative data. Now, the kids you see hanging out at the tree, will probably speak more to Joshua's heart because this is an imaginative play where the students were given background information about coyotes and coyote families. And their job was to each accept a role as a mother, father, or pup in a coyote family. They had to find a den, they had to find a source of water, they had to mark their territory with ribbons and figure out where their food sources would come from. And so they did one iteration where the pups were unable to move out of the den and the parents were getting them food. We came back and we debriefed about that. We went back out again where the pups were older and they were following their parents and finding things to play with, like sticks. We came back, we debriefed again, and then the pups were older and doing their own hunting. So they learned so much about coyotes through play in the outdoors, much more than they ever would have learned reading a book about coyotes. And so I love giving kids that free time, giving the kids games in nature because it solidifies the scientific concepts I'm trying to teach them. And then the picture on the right is from a Maine Audubon field trip that we piloted for the group because my partner teacher is involved with Project Puffin. And the students were given, first they went out and they learned about, they boated out to Hog Island off Bremen, and they were given a slide presentation about Stephen Kress and how he started Project Puffin and brought puffins back to the coast of Maine. They went outside and they were all given a different type of migratory bird to research. And then the creative writing started. They took the information they found about the bird and incorporated the facts of the bird into a creative story. And I mean, the kids were fascinated because there was one bird that flew for 3 days straight by shutting off half its brain at a time. And so they were able to incorporate that into their story. We had a lot of birds that wanted to fight because the cities had lights on and they were losing friends because the birds were flying into the buildings and dying. So we had some revenge stories. We had a bird that stopped at different places in the migration journey, and the kiddo writing that wanted to know something specific about each place so they could talk about it. So if the bird stopped in Georgia, the bird was eating peaches. And just it was really fun to watch the creative writing happen. I could have told them to stay in the classroom and just, write a story, but given that tiny little bit of direction, their work was rich and they were incorporating what they learned into their creative writing.
And absolutely, and creative writing is an art, right? When
Sure.
we talk about the arts, creative writing is an art form. Thanks, Beck. Thank you, Becky. Thank you for sharing that. So, some examples of some things that you might want to try tomorrow with your classes. Um, Nature mandalas, which they focus on symmetry and pattern. What I would say to you is that um, really talk to your students about the fact that the work that they're creating are mandala inspired. Mandalas are sacred symbols in Hinduism, and we want to be careful when we um, are inspired by sacred symbols that we are respectful of the fact that that there is a cultural significance to that symbol. But I know that my students and I have been having lots of conversations about symmetry at the end of second grade. What does that mean when something has symmetry? And in a math book, you're going to look at a circle and see if it has symmetry. And you're going to look at a rhombus and see if it has symmetry. But to build something creative and beautiful that has symmetry, reinforces that concept of what does it mean for something to be symmetrical, for something to have balance. And then in the SEL world, what does it mean for humans to have balance, as opposed to art having balance? Um, doing rubbings of leaves and bark, um, you could do a whole book of leaf rubbings and then write about the trees that those specimens were from. It's sensory. That magic of you rub a pastel or a crayon or something else across it, and the image appears on your paper is really it creates a really strong sensory pleasure. Also, you can, if you do a rubbing of a leaf, you can label the parts of a leaf. You can bring in your science concepts with that. A sound map art. What I love about this is that there's no right or wrong. You find your own space. You listen to the sounds around you and you draw what you think those sounds look like. And do those sounds have color? Do those sounds have texture? Do those sounds create an emotion? Well, how do you portray that emotion when you're drawing? So creating this sort of this collage, this map of the sounds that you hear in your environment, is, I think, a beautiful way to feel connected to what you're doing. Story stones. This does violate, Becky, a little bit the leave nature in nature rule, but you can put them back after you create art on them. Selecting some stones and either taking a story that you're studying in class and illustrating the story on the stones that then your classmates can sequence to retell the story, or just creating images on stones, and then you have a pile of stones and with images on them, and students can go pick 5 or 6 of those stones and create original and unique stories from them. So I could see, Becky, you could decorate a bunch of stones and have them living in owls, and that would be something that you could go to as an activity to randomly pull stones and create a storytelling. It can be writing, it could be storytelling, spoken word. You could create a dramatic play around the images on it. I love that you talked about play earlier, Becky. I'm really on this soapbox lately of we don't allow our children in our schools to play enough anymore. That when I started teaching 33 years ago, um, we played a lot more, and we don't play as much anymore. We're all about meeting the standards, follow the curriculum map, make sure you're not falling behind on your pacing guide. So this is a tool that allows students structure for play. We talked a little bit about self-portraits with nature. And then I want to talk a little bit about photography. I've used photography in 2 different ways. I've done a partnership with the Maine College of Art and Design, where photography majors came with us to a pond that you talked about observing change over time. We started visiting this pond every year in January and visited it every week for the rest of the school year. And one of the things that we did there, as we brought in different community partners to help us interact with this pond that is a public asset in the city of Portland, was we did photography, and they learned how to compose nature photography. And then in the art classroom, they took those photographs and they converted them into watercolors. So they also learned how to create um, natural watercolor paintings. And then we displayed those pieces together. We printed their photos and they displayed them with their art pieces. And then this right now, I'm doing a unit on the Americans with Disabilities Act, which doesn't sound arts integration related. But this week we went outside to the playground. We've been recording all of the accommodations that our school has to make our school a place where students with disabilities can be successful. And we found lots and lots and lots of accommodations inside of our building. And then we went outside to our outdoor spaces and we found zero. And so they are now photo documenting what we have and what is missing. And next week, they're going to spend the week, and it's really our last full week of instruction, writing opinion pieces, and writing to decision makers about what we need to do to make our outdoor spaces accessible to all of the students in our school. And so that's a way that I'm bringing photography in. And even though you could argue that taking pictures of the playground isn't nature-based, we weren't going out to the playground to play. We were going out to the playground to explore that environment and make observations about that environment and ways that we can improve on that built environment because our outdoors do include nature. But as a city boy, I'm also a big fan of the built environment. I am obsessed with the way humans interact and change and manipulate the environment. And I love a well thought out outdoor built environment. And so that's something that I've run into it. Um, Becky, you've talked about, are there any other art projects that you can think of? You've talked about several. Anything else you want to bring to the conversation at this point, or anyone else who's on the call who would like to just jump in? Do not stand on formality.
So, just two facts. When you were talking about photography, it reminded me of the online field guide my kids created. First, they went on a nature walk. They did noticings and wonderings about the trees, and we developed a need for nature-based, or not nature, tree guides, tree field guides. And the students went and photographed their trees that they selected. They researched the trees, and then we created an online field guide for the trees around Wiscasset Elementary School. And then I wanted just to touch back on play. And if anyone ever gives a teacher trouble saying play isn't meeting the standards, I want you to remind them about the guiding principles of the Maine learning results because we want quality and collaborative workers and integrated informed thinkers, and we want leaders. And so what I notice when the kids are playing is they are learning how to collaborate with each other to share materials. They are also taking leadership roles. So one of my students who is in special education services for both reading and math becomes a leader outside when he is using dramatic play to become the leader of a group. And then the savvy teacher who is watching these students play will hear the vocabulary that is developing and then take that opportunity to say, boy, I noticed that blacksmith shop you set up had a forge in it. And then you are able to start talking about more content rich vocabulary. Play does Play and standards are not opposites. They can be blended together. And just don't ever let anyone make you feel guilty for taking kids out to play. That's my soapbox.
Well,
Oh,
we're entitled to our soapboxy moments. I see some winter art happening here. You
sure.
want to talk a little bit about that?
Talk about your ephemeral art, play in snow. And so this was an opportunity that we took with our pre-K nature buddies to spray snow. They had a blast creating their own little snow sculptures. And then when you see the picture on the right, we took the kids outside with and to gather natural materials that were on the ground. So this happened in January, I think. And they let they placed some natural materials inside of a paper plate that we'd sprayed with Pam so that it would be slippery. We left it out overnight and then we went back and discovered these beautiful temporary sun catchers and so they were so excited about it and they knew that they wouldn't last, but they loved them while they were together.
So, some ways that we can, I think that this question, how do you make student learning visible when the art disappears? And I want to be cognizant of people's time. It's a beautiful afternoon, and I appreciate people joining Becky and me for this afternoon. So I'm going to move through this a little quickly. And I think we've touched on a lot of this already. I think that the thing that's new that we haven't talked about is gallery walk writing, and this idea that your students create these works and then they interact with each other's work and they go on a gallery walk and they write about what they observe in their peers' work and they celebrate their peers' work and using those sentence starters. I liked when I saw this, it made me feel. Um, and that's a way to capture it. Obviously, photography and video, we wouldn't be able to look at some of these beautiful pieces your students created, Becky, if you hadn't photographed them. So the artwork was ephemeral, but you have a record of that artwork. Can you think of any other things that we should add about how you make that student learning visible when the art is going to disappear? They can't put it in their backpack and take it home.
I would just highlight the idea of gallery walks beyond writing. When we did our Andy Goldsworthy work, the kids did a gallery walk, and each artist explained their process and their materials and what they used. So, gallery walking around the ephemeral art really validates the kids and what they've done.
A few more pieces.
Sure. So writing again, we nature-based or going outside for shape concrete writing for poetry is one of my kids' favorite things to do. And what you see in the middle there is the pre-K fourth grade collaboration about showing emotion. And then the final piece is just an example of our nature journals.
Great. And again, I think that this also drives home the point that when we're talking about art, we're not just talking about visual and performing arts, creating poetry, creative writing, spoken word. Those are all versions of arts that you can integrate into your curriculum. And I think that when you talk about the gallery walk and artists talking about their work, that is spoken word. I'm guessing that your students rehearsed, thought about what they were going to say, and were ready for that gallery walk. It wasn't just, okay, we made something cool. Now let's all walk around and talk about it. There's that whole artistic process of rehearse, revise, rehearse again, present. So, um, I'm going to, in the interest of time, because it is 4:02, I'm going to let you know that I have all these websites. I do have a Padlet um, that you can access, and I will put all of the resources that I had that I used to research so that I had a strong foundation for this webinar. That Padlet also includes links to all recordings of every webinar I've offered this school year, an opportunity to sign up for the Teacher Leader Fellows newsletter, which comes out twice a month. I mean, not in the summer, but it is a twice a month newsletter. There are currently two Teacher Leadership Fellows. There will be four in the 2025-2026 school year. And I am excited to let you know that this was a one-year appointment, but my appointment has been extended for another year. So I will continue next year as the Department of Education's Arts Integration Teacher Leadership Fellow. Um, so that you can link to my Padlet through the Department of Education's Teaching and Learning homepage. I'd also encourage you to follow Becky on social media, Becky Hallowell, 2025 Maine Teacher of the Year. You can follow me on social media at Joshua Chard, 2024 Maine Teacher of the Year. There are amazing things happening all over this state, and people creatively integrating the arts into their practice. I'm excited about having another year of talking about those things. If you'd like to talk more or get for more information, you can email me at joshua.chard@maine.gov. I check that email twice a week. So I'll get back to you within 72 hours usually if you email me there. And I'd like to open it up. Becky, I'm going to open it up to you for final words. And if there's anyone on the call who would like to say something, um, go ahead and unmute yourself and say something before we end today.
I love getting kids outside and I love supporting other teachers in becoming brave enough to take their students outside. So as Joshua said, you can find me at Becky Hallowell, 2025 Maine Teacher of the Year. Please reach out and I'd love to brainstorm with anybody about how we get kids outside. And I also want to know what you're doing because I'm learning every day from other people. So if you want to share ideas, please reach out.
Hi, Joshua.
Hi.
Hi, Becky. I just wanted to say hi to both of you and thank you for sharing your wisdom. I joined in a little bit late because I had bus duty, but I really enjoyed seeing the Goldsworthy work that you shared. That's a nice reminder of things that we can do with our students. And I did want to share one thing that I did try today with my students. I really like to do cyanotype printing, and I had seen an option for if you have like older construction paper that is not the fade resistant type, you can make sun prints on those. And so I did that today with my class,
Nice.
and it was really cool to have them go out and select their pieces in nature and um, create their compositions. And we had to wait 3.5 hours before we were able to unveil our pieces of work, and we got to leave the nature behind at the end, but we still had this this sun impression of um, what we discovered. So I wanted to share that as an option if maybe your school is like mine and you have stockpiles of really old construction paper. Maybe that's a thing we do on a sunny day.
I also see that as delayed gratification because
Yeah,
they had
absolutely.
to wait for their product.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was great.
Great thought, Jessica. What, and much cheaper than buying the paper.
I also bought the paper too.
Okay.
But, I love that too but this was something I had seen online. I was like, oh, I gotta try it. So, yeah, maybe that's another thing people could add in.
And I
Thanks
know
for
a
that
couple
idea.
folks joined us late, and within a week, this presentation will be up on my Padlet. So if you want to catch the first 15 or 20 minutes on my Padlet, you absolutely can do that.
I'll go back. Thank you so much. I appreciate you both.
Hi,
Thank
Melissa.
Hi, thanks for the hot tip or reminder about the old construction paper. Yeah, I can't bring myself to spend the money on the the cyanotype paper, but that's totally awesome. And I agree. I love that you have to wait. I've been outside all week, and it is so nice to be outside with the students. And then someone has to go to the bathroom, and you're alone with 25 kids outside, but you figure it out. It's great. Yeah, I think schools need to continue um, post COVID to think about the supports that teachers need outside, like spaces that aren't the recess yard, because that doesn't work and things like that. So that
So that
owl
you know,
space sounds amazing.
Melissa is the art specialist at my school. So Melissa also knows that's the challenge of being an urban school in a densely built neighborhood. And that is a big one, isn't it, Melissa? The fact that most of our spaces are play spaces, our outdoor spaces are play spaces.
It is, but we do have. I would say we have. Always tell the kids we have one of the most beautiful views, and we draw cityscapes, which also I think is being outside. Is
That's the built
is
environment.
right, the built environment, working outside. So anyway, I could go on and on, but thanks. I really enjoyed this. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Melissa. Thanks for coming. Anyone else want to hop on before we go? All right. Thank you very much, Becky, for joining me.
Vicky,
Oh,
did you
Vicky,
have
hi.
something?
Joshua,
Hi, Vicky.
I
Vicky?
just want to say hi and thank you to you both. My brain is too fried to
Thank
be
you.
a contributor.
Well, thank you
This
for
was
joining us.
great.
Thanks, Vicky.
Thank you.
All right, everybody. I appreciate you on this one of the most beautiful afternoons we've had, at least in my area, in a long time. I'm sorry to report that Saturday will be the 13th Saturday in a row where it has rained, the 13th. But more beautiful weather is ahead. Um, please enjoy getting outside and creating and communing with nature during the next 2 months while you have the opportunity to recharge and reconnect with yourself. Think about some of the strategies that we talked about for emotional regulation for students and trying some of those strategies for yourself. I know I plan to. I plan to be at Two Light State Park every afternoon for the whole summer with my book in hand um, because that being out in nature changes who we are and how we feel. Thank you, Becky. Thank you, everybody, for coming. and have a great rest of your afternoon.
Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye. Thank you.